Hi all, I have a great treat for you today. This is round 11 of the FIDE World Chess Championship match 2024. So Gukesh is with the white pieces here against Ding Liren. And we start off with knight f3. Okay, d5 and now c4. So Gukesh plays c4. Ding Liren plays actually d4. A more kind of safe alternative, which I would have expected, would have been something like e6 or c6. If we would go with e6, we can easily transpose into just, it's a safe position for black. It's a kind of safe position to play. Or c6, preferring a kind of Slav structure. It's an even position. It's a solid way of playing it. So we actually are getting what I call an imbalance straight away with d4. And actually there's the top engine move here it's a very interesting move which works well in practice as well. So where theory meets practice, it's b4. It's a multi-purpose move. It's kind of discouraging c5, it's preparing bishop b2, which could be followed by e3 for white to grab more central control. We do have c5, and now actually e3. This could be described as a reverse Blumenfeld gambit, this position. So Blumenfeld gambit in reverse. We have knight f6. If c takes b4, we can play e takes d4, and we do get better central control here. We have bishop b2. It's quite hyper-modern. This is like hyper-modern approach to the game. White's getting a small edge here. And if b takes a3, that's just helping white. Knight takes a3. That's just nice for white. Very nice. So knight f6, and now a3. If b5, that kind of gives white's cards away a bit. Queen c7 should be an even position. This is a move that's possible here. And yeah, it creates certain complicated lines, but the game is complicated enough, so let's just go with the game. a3. We have bishop g4, which is actually an inaccuracy. Knight c6 seems to be the most accurate here, not being too keen to give away the light square bishop. For a start, well, if b5, knight a5, d3, if we look at this should be about even. White definitely doesn't want to play b takes c5 because e5, this gives black a nice positional advantage. d3 is also not great for white. D takes, f takes, this position, c takes, b4, a takes, knight takes b4, bishop e2. Let's say g6, white castles. Black has a small edge overall. I would say that it seems the best move seems to be knight c6 here. So b5, knight a5, d3, and this position even. If we go instead to knight, if black goes knight b8, bishop b2, white's getting a small edge here. And it doesn't actually matter about the queens coming off. We can even welcome the queens coming off here. If the queens come off here, b6, bishop e2, white does have a small edge overall. There are lots of plans which could be useful here later, like a4, a5, knight e5, bishop f3. There are lots of ideas. Okay, so anyway, bishop g4, though, is played. We have e takes, d4, c takes. If bishop takes f3, this wouldn't be too clever for queen takes d4 because white's there first. Forget taking the rook, queen c8 is checkmate. So yeah, c takes d4 is needed. We have h3, and now bishop takes f3. If the bishop refuses to take on f3, g4 accelerates the fianchetto here, bishop g2, and white should be able to get, well, it is pleasant enough for a small advantage here, a small edge. So bishop takes here, queen takes f3, queen c7, d3. We have a5 and now b5, which seems to, black seems to have a juicy c5 square at this moment to make use of. And I thought during the live stream that black was getting a positional advantage here. And this took a long time to actually fianchetto the bishop. But there's a lot of involved variations with g3 and then later bishop g2. I say later, yeah, quite a lot of delay on both moves. So the issue is with knight c5, it's not just about pressure on d3, it's about this knight b3. But bishop g2 after some thought played anyway. And Gukesh was catching now Ding Liren back on the clock. So what on earth is going on here? It is like a chaotic situation. This is the move White wants to play to emphasize the light square advantage that White has, the light square bishop without counterpart. But we have to use calculation to try and get our dreams coming true. A lot of players may be rejecting this move because of knight b3. Because what do we do about this fork? The thing is, we can take on b7, queen takes, bishop takes, and then there's rook a7. Let's say rook a7. There's check, and let's say knight d7. White can sacrifice the exchange, and we have to evaluate the resulting positions here. And actually, I would say evaluation is difficult without actually thinking a few more moves ahead. What's going to happen here? I'm going to give you a fictional scenario from this position. So king d1, knight c5, king c2. So we can claim White as a small edge, but White in particular. Let's take it further. Undermine the center. If black plays taking, we do get a rolling pawn center. Let's imagine f6. Knight d2, a4. Let's imagine h4, king b6, h5. We've got a plan here now to play sometimes for g4, g5. So this is taking this further. There's a lot of pressure on the black position. We've got g5 on the cards, knight e4. Let's take this simplification. White's getting a small overall edge. It does seem as though there's a lot of pressure points. There's a strategic pawn break here. There's pressure on the center. This is a really interesting exchange sack line. Yeah, there could be a lot of thematic games from this position. If we examine this again, if rook b8, that's not as good. Bishop c6, check. And then bishop f4 hits b8. So say e5 taking. This is no good, this position for black. White's got a clear advantage there. So yes, the main line would appear to be like this. And then check. And then knight d7 I mentioned. Not king d8. Because again, well, king d8 is possible, but bishop b2. The exchange set is working pretty well. So yes, this is the first. Yeah, a lot of time was spent here on bishop g2. You can understand why now more. So knight f d7. We see White castling, and now knight e5. So the black king's still in the centre. It looks as though active operations, sometimes they backfire if one hasn't castled. If knight b3, this position, knight takes, rook takes, knight c5, knight d2, e6. White does have an advantage here. This is pretty pleasant. There's numerous ideas, especially if knight e4 to get rid of one of black's best pieces, pressure on b7. Lots of ideas. Sometimes b6 for rook b5, lots of ideas here. So knight e5 is played. We have queen f4. So White's relying on this pin here. And this is also super intriguing. What is going on? Even though that knight's pinned, what about the fellow knight? Why can't the fellow knight take on d3? What on earth is going on here? This is madness behind the scenes. So here, Ding Liren ended up playing rook d8. So why didn't he take the pawn? So here, yeah, there's a lot of intriguing variations. But maybe best is queen e4. And let's say knight c5, queen takes d4, white's getting a small edge. Yeah, this is, yeah, there's a lot of interest here. But yeah, queen e4 keeps a lot of pressure on the black position. It might be one of the best moves. Another one is g5. This is razor sharp idea. Queen takes. If queen takes d4 here, bishop g7. So the immediate threat is knight f3 check. So let's say queen e3, knight e takes d3. Now, including bishop takes a1 as a threat, rook moves. This position, though, it should be just even. However, white improves. White doesn't take on g5. White plays queen takes d4 here. Sorry, white doesn't play queen takes d4 here. White plays queen takes g5. That's what I'm trying to say. Queen takes g5. The black king's still in the center. So knight e takes d3. We just play knight d2. And it does seem as though we should get an advantage here after knight e4. White's going to get a small edge. This situation, knight d2, this is just an example. Rook d1. You can see that there's some pressure on black's center. And here, in fact, white's advantage is quite likely to grow with bishop d2, it seems. So maybe white's got a clear advantage overall anyway, because bishop b4 is strong here, as well as b6. To take it a bit further, rook a to c8, bishop b4, then this position taking out c5, taking out b7. And the resulting, even though it's opposite coloured bishops, this is in white's favour. It's more comfortable for white. So this situation is going to be pretty uncomfortable for black. So anyway, so yeah, there's some crazy stuff going on. If g5 probably needs a look at. Queen d6, there's knight d2, and here knight e takes d3. White can take, and rook b1. So even though black technically a pawn up here, let's say bishop e7, knight b3, looking at d4. Let's say bishop f6, knight takes h4. It should just be an even position. That's an intriguing one, queen d6. If it's played like that, it should lead to an even position. If it's played with castling here, yeah, bishop f6 has to be played, otherwise the d pawn drops. But it does seem as though that might be a route for equalizing, to play queen d6. f6 is also another route which is intriguing, which might at least be equal for black. D pawn goes rook d8, knight c takes d3, e6, and let's say f4. This is crazy business. Queen takes c4, f takes, queen d4 check, knight takes c1, hits the queen, the rook's taken, e takes, queen takes. White has, it seems, enough compensation to at least be equal, even though the exchange down and a pawn down should be dynamically equal. So anyway, there's at least queen d6 and the tactical f6, or the tactical g5 is intriguing as well, but that does seem to lead overall to white having an advantage, g5. So rook d8 seems actually one of the most accurate moves, and it's returned with what seems to be an inaccurate move, rook d1. Knight d2, entertaining crazy business of losing the kind of Benoni pawn. It's like a Benoni pawn structure as well. It's like that pawn in the Benoni can sometimes be sacrificed. The strong Benoni players are often thinking about sacrificing that pawn on d6 in reverse. But here, yeah, if it's taken, b6, after queen takes b6, queen e4, leaves black with some issues which should at least give white equality. This position, there's pressure on b7. Here there's quite a bit of pressure on the black position. And let's say c5, bishop g7, queen b5 check, we can get a pawn back, and it goes into equality. So yeah, the king's not ideal. So that's with knight d2, which seems in theory the most accurate move here. Let's take a quick look at that again. So b6, if knight takes f4, then b takes c7, check. Here, this is a big advantage for white. We play rook takes e5 here. Rook takes a5, check, knight f3. This leads to a big advantage for white. Black's pieces are not too organised, and if black has to play bishop e7 now, there's too many threats in the position going on here. There's too many. The best might be bishop e7 to neutralise some of the pressure, but yeah, white has a big advantage here. So anyway, knight d2 does seem the most accurate, but rook d1 was played, and now it's returned by an inaccuracy, it seems. f6, even though that looks kind of horrible on the surface, this might actually be the way to go here. And it does vacate f7 for the king. Let's imagine this position. It does provide support for g5. And if queen d2, knight b3. And the exchange sack here is actually, it does seem to be in black's favour. This exchange sack variation would seem to be, as example, in black's favour. Yeah, f6. So a4, king f7. Yeah, this d3 pawn is an absolute pain here. This is total pain. If we go back with the bishop, g5 is even worse. Because then queen d2, like losing the queen to a check. So that's like a total pain, this position. Yeah, but, this is what could be very, very accurate, what could be seen as very, very accurate play. Not knight takes d4, not this because queen e2 is even, but knight b3, yeah, forking queen and rook here. This should be in black's favour. So that's fascinating stuff, f6. Okay, but instead g6 was played, which is like a return inaccuracy. We have a4, and now h5. If knight b3 here, rook a2, if knight takes, rook takes, bishop g7. Let's say rook e2, black castle, c5. This ends up in white's favour. White's getting a nice space advantage and has disconnected the a5 pawn. So here white's getting a really nice advantage, taking out a5. So anyway, h5 is played. And now we have b6. Very interesting move. Very interesting. We have queen d6. If queen takes b6, we're just taking the knight. If queen b8, queen d2, let's say queen d2, knight b3, queen b2, knight takes a1, there's bishop f4, bishop g7, knight d2, and let's take this position. This position actually seems to be about even. It should be at least even. Black's going to have to probably counter-sack the exchange. It's going to be even. If we played bishop a3, knight e takes d3, queen f3, knight e5, here knight e6, black's getting a small edge at least. It is chaos. There's a lot of variations which are chaos in this game. But anyway, queen d6 was played. We have bishop a3 and now bishop h6. Yeah, it's getting tricky for black. It is getting tricky. So let's go with bishop h6. Bishop takes c5. Queen takes. Queen e4. Well, there's not too many options there. But we're looking at b7. Now that's covered with knight c6. Yeah, if castling, we can just safely take on b7. So it's covered with knight c6. Knight a3. Rook d7. And now knight c2. If knight b5, black does get a chance to just sneakily take that pawn. There's no punishment there. So knight c2, and this is like a positional pawn sacrifice, which is accepted. Now, if it's ignored, then rook a to b1, and here rook b5 is going to be nice. Queen e2 is now, this is unveiling bishop takes c6 as an issue for black. Taking out c6, taking out a5 leaves white with a big advantage. So yes, the pawn is taken, but it does give white now pressure on the b file. White's position seems to be getting very organized in its appearance on the light squares. It's like white's enjoying the light square pressure. Black castles. And now this is like the craziest looking move of any World Chess Championship match, but there's a lot of logic to it. Nimzovich played such knight moves to the corner. It's actually knight a1. And given the time situation, it's also not just very strong as in building up, set up, major threats. The knight springs back via b3 to c5 here. So threats on, pressure on b7, but more subtle threats, knight a6 sometimes, if there's a build-up of pressure on the b file. So very strong move psychologically, because it was probably completely unexpected by Ding Liren, who was already in, getting in big time trouble. A more straightforward doubling of rooks is also possible here. Let's say queen c8, queen e2, and believe it or not, in this engine line, the major threat for white is knight a1. That actually becomes officially, at least on my level of engine analysis, the major threat in this position. This is actually a very powerful idea in this position to reroute the knight. Let's say e5, bishop takes c6, then rook takes e5. Let's say king h7, we get knight a1 in, and rook takes b7 there for a big advantage. What can black do? Black's just not doing too much here. Not knight a3. So knight a1 is the most powerful move. So I mentioned rook d6, we're just taking. If b6 here, we're just taking. If h4, sort out that first, g4, then knight b3. And here, yeah, we're coming in with knight c5. And if knight a7, rook b6, and there's too much pressure on the black position, something's giving hint, because the pressure on a5, the pressure on b7. Let's say bishop c7, rook takes b7. Yeah, white's just getting a big advantage there in that line. So that was with rook d to b1 first, which engine suggests might be the most accurate way to play. And then queen e2 has got the big threat of knight a1. So whatever black does, it seems as though, we're going to get an advantage here. For example, like this. Well, it's just it's a powerful position. So actually, it's a powerful positional sacrifice, which is like an investment, and we'll get more than the pawn back. Basically, it's like a positional pawn sacrifice investment, paying off here in this line. But knight a1 straight away did allow technically a resource which was missed. Rook b8 was played. It seems there's a resource rook d6, which makes things slightly different. So if we double rooks here, there's rook b8, knight c2, bishop d2, slightly different picture of things. And then queen h4, knight b4, it's a different picture. It's like an even position all of a sudden. Yeah, this rook d6 is interesting. So we double, and then there's this situation. And if we played knight b3, this is the other intriguing thing here. There's rook e6. Queen moves, rook f6. Queen moves to e2, b6. c5, there's knight a7. And this leads to an even position. Yeah, it does seem as though technically rook d6 might be a resource. Pretty tricky stuff, pretty tricky finesses here. But anyway, rook b8 was played. Now knight b3, and now e6 is an inaccuracy creeping in. But it's difficult. King h7 doesn't help either. Knight c5, doubling the rooks. Let's say knight b4, queen e5. And let's say bishop d7 here. Okay, what is white doing? Well, bishop e4. White's got some threats on this side of the board, including queen takes h5, and pressure on this side of the board. Overall, it's pretty nice for white. If rook d6, this might be more accurate here, rook d6 here, than e6. So knight c5, rook f6. White seems to have a completely optimal, coordinated, organized position against b7, right? But let's go with knight a7, rook takes, b7, rook takes, knight takes, knight c6, knight c5, knight b4. This is the kind of positional backfire if the knight gets into b4. So this should limit the advantage of white a bit. So let's say c5. Yeah, white's got a small edge. It's complicated stuff going on here. There's a lot of complicated variations. If taking, sometimes there's rook d6 for taking on d3. So there's a lot of complicated lines here. But anyway, e6 was played. This is all in time trouble now. Knight c5. We have rook e7. If rook d6, rook d to b1. And this is tricky for black. Knight b4 might need to be played. Knight takes b7. Rook b6. Queen e5. Queen takes. Rook takes. And the resulting situation here is in white's favour. If knight takes d3, rook b5, rook takes, c takes in white's favour. If instead rook takes b5, c takes, this is better for white. These passed pawns have great potential. Let me just show you that again. Knight takes b7. Sorry, on rook b6, yeah, just to recap here, on rook b6, there's queen e5. This leads to an advantage for white. The other thing is, if rook d7, that's right, and now rook c5 here, queen takes, this position is also in white's favour. Because, yeah, the passed pawn potential is pretty good, and we can get the material back here. This is too much to consider rook takes b5, these two connected passed pawns. That'll be too much, and this is just a winning position for white. So anyway, rook e7 was played, and the pressure is immense. Now look at how coordinated white's position is all of a sudden. So this is looking like a really logical move. Knight takes b7 was also possible. And here, for example, queen takes d4, this position, queen b6, queen takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, knight takes, rook b5. This leads to a situation which is in white's favour. So anyway, rook d to b1. We have a total disaster move now after all of this. Queen c8, total disaster move, queen c8. You only had a few minutes left, Ding Liren, though, to be fair. If knight b4, this had to be played. Knight b4 had to be played. So knight takes b7, bishop f8, c5, e5. Let's say c6, rook e6, queen e2, knight takes c6, queen c2. You can see there's a lot of pressure on the queen side here. Rook c8, bishop d5. We are going to get material like this, for example, and this is going to be a big advantage for white. So yeah, big advantage for white. Taking this further, even if it's opposite colour bishops here, it's still in white's favour. it's an A pawn which helps. The bishop's looking at the queening square. Knight b4 definitely had to be played. Knight d8 runs into a tactic I mentioned earlier. Can you see a tactic for white for 10 points? Yeah, there's knight a6 winning the exchange. So anyway, but this is a total disaster move, queen c8. Guess what white plays for 100 points? Yeah, queen takes c6. It's also, you could say it's like also reversed like Benko Gambit by this point, and there's a lot of tactics in the Benko Gambit on the b file which often win. So this is winning here, queen takes c6. So if b takes, we're just a piece up here, we're just a piece up. Yeah, it's end of game there. And queen takes, yeah, bishop takes. And again, if b takes, yeah, we just material up, we're whole rook up there. So yeah, at the end of the game, queen takes c6. Very entertaining game. A lot of crazy variations, crazy variations in this game. And a lot of time pressure from both players. Yeah, quite the dramatic game. Didn't expect this at all. This game, it went into very dynamic, kind of imbalanced territory early on with this d4 move, in my view, making it very kind of hyper-modern ideas, tactics, strategies. A bit like sometimes the reverse Blumenfeld, a bit like reverse Benoni, sometimes later about looking like a reverse Benko Gambit, especially when the b pawn was sacrificed. It became like a reverse Benko Gambit. And as in Benko Gambits, you know, quite often the b file is kind of decisive for tactics, for pins on the b file. Okay, great stuff. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you check out my playlist, World Championship playlist. So it's kingscrusher.tv/W C 2024. I also have chess courses, kingscrusher.tv. I've got over 40 chess courses now. I've been doing chess courses the last few years. I've really enjoyed doing them. I hope you can see that in the actual amount of content and enthusiasm in the courses. So I hope you check out my courses page. Okay, so if you got to this point in the video, yeah, any comments welcome. How you felt the game was. Will Knight A1 win the World Championship match? That iconic Knight A1 retreat, Knight on the corner to re-centralise. Nimzovich would be proud. Okay, because he played some eccentric looking knight moves in his time, like Knight H1 in some classic games. Great stuff. Fun stuff. Fun one today. Thanks so much.